By listening, you're acknowledging that the copyright to this audio material is owned by the Michal Levin Institute and by Christos Vayenas. No part of it may be reproduced or duplicated without permission in writing from Michal Levin and from Christos Vayenas. And remember, this copyright is also protected by the universal eternal laws of karma. Thank you. For more information, email michal@michal.uk.com.
It isn't possible to put a word to what I do. I wouldn't have had a word for it before it sought me, and I don't really have a word for it now. It's best known by its effects, but perhaps the right place to start is to say a little about the transformation that I underwent, and indeed the process that's ongoing that brought me to this work. Prior to the transformation, I was a very respectable professional. I was a current affairs television reporter for, among others, #1 current affairs programme on the BBC. I'd written a book on refugees in the UK. I had a very successful life. My particular interest was medicine, actually continues to be the medical sphere, treatment and health. But I wasn't, if you'd said to me, isn't clairvoyance fascinating? I would have said to you, no, I don't think so. Maybe to others, but it's not for me. I'm certainly not a clairvoyant now, but I entered another realm. It happened in stages. The first stage was extreme discomfort. I became unable to function in my professional life. Not that anything showed on the outside, but internally there was a war going on, except I didn't know who the protagonists were, or indeed what was being warred. That's to say, what was the subject? What was this disquiet, this discomfort, this rage inside me? It wasn't anger at all, but it was a furious conflict. What was it about? I didn't have any idea. But I did know that it drained me. It drained me completely, and that my mind wasn't free to do my work. Now, it was free for my children, so I was at peace only when in the confines of our own home, concentrating on something for the children. I've always been able to do that. They've always taken precedence in an instinctive, immediate way. I took a sabbatical from my work, thinking maybe it's a rest I need. I'd been divorced, perhaps I just simply needed a rest. But I also thought that I would try and find something relaxing to do that might help unwind me. So I like painting. I joined a painting class with a very proficient painter. I exercised. I was diligent. I took up the yoga that I had been rather dilettantishly playing with for years. Nothing, however, made much difference to what was going on inside. It's a long story. I'm not going to take the time to tell it all to you now. If you want to read it, I kept a diary through that time, and that diary eventually became a book. The book's called The Pool of Memory, the autobiography of an unwilling intuitive. But the first time I really got a clue about what was unfolding was actually in a painting class when, looking at a model, I began to see colours and later lines and shapes between people, inside people. Lines or shapes or colours that I somehow understood had a meaning, and even more, that I knew what they meant. And that, of course, was terribly frightening and suggested to me nothing more or less than that perhaps I was suffering a breakdown. Eventually, the time of my sabbatical was up. It was time for me to go back to work, and I just simply didn't feel that I could. And in real despair, I went to see a homeopath. I wasn't very keen on alternative medicine at that point, but honestly, I was willing to try anything. And she was very helpful with a small ailment that regular medicine hadn't been able to clear up. But she said to me in a very knowing way, she said, you should meditate. It'll be easy. I was actually affronted. I had no interest in meditation and indeed very little idea of what people did except that they sat around and thought about nothing. Thinking about nothing wasn't appealing to me. I've always had a very active intellect and an enormous curiosity. Couldn't quite see how this was going to work for me. But anyway, I did. I almost on autopilot sat down one night, the details are in the book, The Pool of Memory, and positioned myself in a particular way, unconsciously, not for any reason, but later, of course, I understood there was a reason, and closed my eyes and prepared to be very bored. Instead, something extraordinary happened. It was as if another world opened. I won't give you the details now, but very soon I was meditating at least twice a day for as long as I could carve the time, early in the morning and late at night, particularly when it was quiet. I discovered what seemed to be a world. At least it had location. It had continuity. There were, I hesitate to use the words, there were beings there, and a story of sorts running, and even more extraordinary, I was expected, and indeed even berated for being so slow in showing up. I went along with the process. Being a well-trained reporter, I took notes after each session, all of which seemed to me to be utterly incredible. I took notes. There were changes in my body too, movements, spontaneous movements that were peculiar. I also, again being a well-trained reporter, tried to find out just what was going on. So, if this was happening to me, surely it had happened to others. Surely there was some reference in literature to this. Somewhere I must be able to find out what it was about. I couldn't possibly be the only person experiencing this sort of, I didn't have a word for it. One of the things I also did was resolve to have myself checked out mentally, because by now I had a strong suspicion that it was a breakdown I was suffering. And visiting a Buddhist center, I was checking out all the religions, Catholicism, Buddhism, taking a good look to see if anyone had a tradition that might encompass what was happening to me. I noticed on a notice board the name of someone offering psychotherapy. I vaguely thought I recognized the name, but a Buddhist psychotherapist appealed, and checking out that all the qualifications were regular qualifications and that this was someone who actually worked for the National Health Service in the UK, I went along. Turned out it was someone I'd been at university with, and that encouraged me to tell her what was happening. She listened and she asked what seemed to be knowing questions. She clearly knew a great deal about meditation, and she wanted precise details about what was coming up in my meditation. And I said, look, it's huge. There are numerous characters. There are complicated stories. Today there was a particularly odd character. And she said, well, describe this character. And I said, well, many arms. She said, yes, how many arms? And I told her, and what colour, and I told her, and exactly what happened. And I described the incident that happened. And she looked pretty serious, and I thought, yes, I know what's coming. She's going to turn around and say, terribly sorry, but you really are having a breakdown. But when I finished, I said, well, tell me, what do you think? And I said, before you tell me what you think, let's agree that if you need to refer me to a mental hospital, we do this together. I had some experience having a psychology degree behind me of what went on in hospitals, mental hospitals particularly, and was, to say the least, very wary of being caught up in that system. And she shook her head and she said, no, what's happening to you is extraordinary. It's very precious, it's very rare. The sequence you've just described to me is a sequence that we in my Buddhist community only teach to our very senior students. And you described it. You seem to know all about it, despite the fact that you've had no experience, almost no contact, except the more recent contact with the Buddhist religion. She was very keen that I go and see her teacher and the head of the organization and become involved. I was not keen on doing that. I was absolutely sure that Buddhism wasn't something that I wanted to pursue, but was enormously relieved that she felt I didn't have a mental problem of any sort. I didn't necessarily take the rest of what she said very seriously. However, a little while later, and more had happened, and again, you'll have to read the book for the details of what had happened in between. A little while later, I received a call from this same therapist, and she said to me that she had a problem, and she believed that I could help her finding the solution to that problem. And I was totally skeptical. I was very clear with her that this wasn't anything I could possibly approach to do, but she was very welcome to come and have a cup of tea with me and we could have a chat, and if I could help her in any way, of course I would. Well, she came with a silk scarf over her arm and an envelope, and apparently these were features of her tradition. And she said to me, I think you can indeed help me, and I'm going to tell you what's troubling me, and I will listen to whatever you have to say. So she laid out a problem, and I opened my mouth to say, gosh, that sounds very tricky. I'm so sorry. I can't offer anything, all words to that effect. And instead found that words started to come out of my mouth. They weren't words that I chose, and I couldn't say that I was very sure of what I was saying, but it appeared to be coherent and it appeared to meet her need. When I finished, she said, thank you. I knew that you'd be able to help, and she asked some follow-on questions, all of which I found I could answer too. When I finished, she said to me, you know, you can help a great many people. And I said, absolutely not. I explained to her that I didn't know what I was doing. I regarded this all as fluke and very odd. And apart from anything else, I had extensive experience, not only a psychological background, but I had been through psychoanalysis myself. I was very wary of the possibility that if she referred patients or clients to me, I would be dealing with people with genuine mental problems, and I was in no way equipped to do that. Finally, we came to an understanding, and the understanding was that she would refer others to me, but she would only refer others who were professionally working with patients themselves. And in that way, they could perhaps be guaranteed to take responsibility for themselves. That was the agreement we came to. Well, very soon in a few months, my books were absolutely full. I saw as many people as I could possibly find the energy and the time to see. And after that, it spread. People from all walks of life became my clients. And that's continued for more than 20 years now. And so you might say, yes, fine, I helped in one position or one situation with a psychotherapist answering a question for her. But what did I do for normal people? What did I do for business people, for artists, for people from all walks of life? Did I answer particular questions from all of them? And in fact, that isn't what I did. Over the years, I've worked hard to try and understand what it is that I do. And in the beginning, not only did I speak to clients, but I also worked with them in what must now be called hands-on healing, the placing of hands. And again, it wasn't anything I knew anything about, but rather that internal voice, which became clearer and clearer, instructed me what to do. And I found that I was actually able to help. I didn't go on doing hands-on healing for very long, maybe a year or more, for all sorts of reasons, not least because I didn't feel my gift was to work with physical ailments. So again, what did I do? Well, the conclusion that I've come to is that I am able to act as a kind of touchstone. That's to say, coming in contact with me helps others to be normalized, grounded, to find their own center, to own themselves, to own their authentic selves, and to be, it's a rather clumsy expression, but it is the one I think that fits, to be the best they can.